All right, welcome back, everyone. I'm going to pass this to Kim, and we can start with the report outs. Kim?
Great, thank you. So let's start with business operations framework. I believe the architecture guys needed a few more minutes. So I can share my screen, or Paul, if you prefer, you can share yours. Is Paul here?
Yes, I'm available. Why don't you share yours?
Sure. Hopefully you guys can see. Oops. My screen. I'll make it a little bit bigger.
So a good place to start would be on the with the objectives.
Okay, sure.
And right at the end, we decided to maybe start adding to this. So it might change, but I'll talk through how it would change. At the moment, really the four objectives we've set out is really about trying to get people to contribute to and sort of start using and adopting and being part of the work. So in summary, what we've got is a working solution, but the people who are using it, so we want more people to use it, but when they are using it, they we would like to help them and encourage them to sort of extend that current functionality or that functional offering to solve some of the problems that they've got within the environment. So the first goal is really a community member adding a new report, a community member merging changes into the doc repository, community member making changes to the business of framework micro front end, and then a stretch goal, maybe community members building a new micro front end, because that functionality is really convenient. Now there's two parts to this. The one is standardized reports, or that really exist within the community, and there is customizations that are very specific to problems that only maybe reside within a hub operator. And for me, this is both. This is either, rather. And the main reason is what we want to do, and the objective of building this BizOps framework was to create a framework so that people can customize it and make it fit for the environment. And not all reports are going to be general. And if they are, then they would come back to the community. But specific reports to your hub operations, you would keep internally, and we should be supporting both those efforts. So if we now, could you go to maybe the first, some of the tasks that we got on there? So the first part of it is that we put in place is to get the segregation of duties out into the UAT environment. The functionality has been complete, but it wasn't complete in time to get deployed in the current UAT environment. We're hoping to get that out there in the next one, and then I really think that workshops, we want to have some workshops. The workshops themselves we will record and should become sort of a piece of training or an artifact that is available to the community, where other people can then learn from or take those workshops. So we really put down 3 successive workshops. The first one reports, the second one extending micro front ends, and the last one sort of building new micro front ends. So and then right at the end, someone mentioned that this is just a training work stream now, and in fact we've got a bit of a backlog. We should be working against some of those items in the backlog. And certainly we do have a backlog, and we will be working against them. And they currently sort of tasks and epics that are on the current Mojaloop project boards. So I'm not sure if we need to. Well, we ran out of time. We didn't get to put them on the board, but I think an ongoing theme behind this would be sort of working towards and meeting some of that backlog. In terms of risks, so if we jump to the risks part, there were sort of three main risks. The first one is, we built this into our ISC, and so it's easy to deploy using ISC. And we've structured the Helm charts so that they follow the new Mojaloop 4 structure. So the Helm charts are a really available resource. But having said that, there is still some work if people are using other deployment mechanisms in adopting the BOF. So there is a bit of a gap there, and that could be a risk to getting more and more people to use this. And then we've put as much documentation as we could in place on really telling people how to use the system, but it's certainly nowhere near as what we would like it to be. So there is a gap on really how to build that knowledge or leverage what's there. And we're hoping that those workshops would really go a long way to mitigate some of that risk. And then another interesting part, and I think this ties in with some of the work that the reference architecture guys are doing, and that is there is a real limitation as to how much RBAC restrictions we can put in place. And this is because there's the same API endpoint often performs more than one action, and it's difficult to separate them as a result. For instance, enabling and disabling a participant, it would be lovely to be able to separate those permissions out, but the operational API is, in fact, the backend part is the same. So because we're calling the Mojaloop APIs directly, we can't separate out that RBAC control. And there's more than one example of that. Yes, we didn't actually get round to voting on this. So my guess would be a 4, because that's what normally everyone votes on. Kim.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Appreciate that. Okay, so any questions for Paul or the business operations business operations work stream? Okay, well, let me turn it over to Michael, and Michael will discuss ISO.
Thanks very much, Kim.
Yeah, do you want to start with the objectives?
Nothing would give me greater pleasure.
Great.
Okay, so the objectives are.
I'm sorry, can I jump in quickly, Michael? I'm sorry to interrupt. I was hoping I could get a quick word in on the business operations framework. Paul.
The floor is yours, Miller.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Paul, are you still available? I wanted to talk through that one issue you brought up on the risk side, which has to do with the separation of function across the API. And I guess I didn't fully understand that. The original goal, as I understood it, was to develop the API to support the functions of the business operations framework in such a way that this permissions strategy was possible, and then to put the front end on top of that. It sounds like it may have been done in the opposite order. That is, the front end developed first, mapped onto an existing API, and the permissions strategy therefore struggles a bit because it doesn't have the API granularity that it needs. But did I misunderstand where we are in the process?
You're probably right. what we did is we took the Financial Portal version 2 functionality and we imported it as it was into the BizOps framework. And really it's a consequence of that. The Financial Portal version 2 functionality calls largely the backend APIs, operational APIs, and that's where that limitation is. So a big part of the work that we did do was to sort of build up this RBAC, but then to get it in play, we took the BizOps framework and we included it in there, which is a really good, important milestone to meet. So we functionally equal to what's already out there. But because of the backend APIs, there are restrictions, and this is the next place that we really need to start looking into.
And is that called out in the work program for this work stream?
It's mentioned as a risk. The exact fix for it and appetite to fix it and getting people to, not directly, but I think it will be soon. We need to understand how important it is to separate some of those functions out, and there are some quick wins that we can put in place to separate those functions. We need to understand how important it is, and what we got in place isn't bad. It's a big step from what we've had, but there are some limitations that, where, for instance, that disabling the participant, it would you would want to have more people to be able to disable and less people to be able to enable, and currently you can't do that. So to be able to restrict it is a good step in the right direction, but we need more.
Yeah, I guess my question is really more about what the work program would look like within this work stream for completing the, I guess I'll call it the API support for the business operations framework as it's expressed through this RBAC design. It seems that given that we did this in somewhat the other order, we started with what we had functionally, but it wasn't, the functional design originally for the finance portal didn't take into account the needs of the RBAC, then it may be very difficult to retrofit that. That was a risk that was called out up front. And I think we're now struggling with that. So what I think might be helpful is for the work stream to look at the API design itself to see what it is that is required with respect to what the permissions design needs. Remembering that the front end should be fungible. I should be able to replace the front end at any time with anything that I'd like. And it's the API and the permission structure that really represent the function.
So a lot of that work on what that participant lifecycle should look like was done as part of the reference architecture work stream, and really like the proposals, and that would solve a lot of it. But we don't have that currently in place. So there's a gap, and we need to find the best way forward.
Fair enough. Well, I think that maybe is the thing, without taking up too much more time here. I wanted to be sure that there is focus placed on that, and that it's not just going to be basically modifying the API to match the old finance portal. What we're really after is the proper design of the API and its expression of permission structure, such that you can have any front end that you want, and that those can be done using the Jamstack strategy. I think we need to see how do we close that gap to get to that point.
Yeah. So currently it's sort of
Sorry,
central
Paul.
settlements and central ledger APIs that are being called.
Yeah. So
You are. Okay.
yeah, just to put some reiterate, Paul, some of the points you made there is that there was in the main elements and deliverables in this work stream, there were a number of bounded contexts that were evolved and progressed in accordance with the reference architecture. And those were kind of, virgin territory, and we were able to evolve them to be fully compliant in the way we wanted it to work going forward. Some of the gaps that Paul is talking about now is really because of the extension and alignment to some of the existing features, which we weren't originally in the scope of what we were trying to do, but to try and bring them in alignment as quickly as possible, so that future efforts can keep evolving them in a more Jamstack aligned approach and more reference architecture approach. So we should, it's kind of a case of we need to bag the good functionality and delivery and the good model, and have an approach for how we keep evolving some of that existing functionality which wasn't reworked. So things like participant lifecycle, wasn't actually I don't think it got quite the resources expected to deliver it, but obviously if it was, it would have been done and extended using the RBAC solution. So I just want us to kind of separate those two things in our minds. There are more APIs, there are more services which will need to fit in that pattern to be compliant as we go forward. But we now have the path laid to achieve that.
Well, thanks, Warren. That's great. I guess the focus that would be helpful for me is a measurement of completion against that over the next few PIs, that whatever it takes to close that gap is to understand during each PI, which of those areas are we moving from the old plan to the new plan, if you will, and how are we getting that to that point. What we ultimately want is to be able to deploy the front end code from a CDN and be able to hit through the expression of the RBAC for a particular user, those functions that are exposed only by the API on the back end without any server functions or other things that would normally come through a web server structure. So to get to that point, what do we lack? And how do we close that gap? If it's, well, really the only way to do that is to wait until the reference architecture is further along, and this is more stopgap, we should probably call that out and say that's what we're doing. We need to get this into place. WinePay needs it, or however it needs to be deployed. We can't wait for the reference architecture to be finished. We're going to work with it as is, but our plan to converge is fill in the blanks. So we understand a little bit about how we're moving away from the old style web server style front end, portal front end, to the Jamstack style, and what the open gaps are. Anyway, I think that would be helpful to understand that a little better.
Okay.
Thank you. But it's just great. I'm very glad to see that you got as far as you did. I mean, especially using the finance portal as is means that the functionality moved across, and we didn't really take a huge step back, which is that's great. It's got to be good for the end users too. So thank you, and sorry for the interruption. I appreciate the time though to walk through that.
Okay. Thanks.
Great. Thanks. Back to me, Michael.
Thank you very much, Kim. So our objectives for this PI are really as follows. First of all, agreement on the business justification. That is the document that we will submit to the ISO 20022 standards organization, specifying what messages we want to support our system. Second of all, a draft market practice document, and that, as you will probably recall, is the document that says, in a modular context, how do you use the messages that are defined in ISO 20022 to actually do things like make a payment, register an identifier, all of the actual functional things that we want to do. Third, we want to be in a position to generate draft schemas and draft message examples for the messages that we've agreed in the business justification. And that will provide us obviously with raw material for which we can start looking at an implementation, an ISO 20022 based implementation of the Mojaloop system. And finally, we would hope to be in a position to have done a draft code design specifying what will need to be done to the code itself, the switch code that is, in order to support this. So those are our 4 objectives for the PI. The risks that we've highlighted are 2, but I think they are risks that we probably try and pay some detailed attention to over the course of the next PI. First of all, there's a risk that there will be some irresolvable content conflict between Mojaloop and ISO. It may be that there are things that we believe we need to do that we can't find a way of representing which is acceptable to the ISO organization. Now that's potentially a serious problem, and we need, I think, to do some thinking and some thinking together with the ISO organization to understand how we would resolve a conflict like that. In particular, because that conflict will typically, I think, take the form of the Change Control Board or similar, saying we absolutely must have things in this way, and the ISO special interest group saying you absolutely can't. So that's a risk which we can at least start addressing. The second is that the timetable for the ISO organization to respond to requests for changes isn't quick enough for us. Now, those of you who are involved in Change Control Board matters may not think that we are very quick at responding to required changes in our APIs, but my impression is that we are very much quicker than ISO 20022 is, and there may be a problem, I think, with synchronizing those 2 timetables and making sure that we can respond in early enough time to the pressures of our implementers and potential implementers without causing a problem with the ISO organization. So those are the 2 main risks that we think. Apart from that, I think that the tasks that we propose are reasonably well understood, I think, at the moment. We have 2 particular milestones, one at the end of the first sprint, which is to resubmit the business justification to the ISO organization. As you know, we've already submitted a draft and we need to incorporate the comments on that. And second, at the end of the second sprint, to issue a draft market practice document, which will essentially be for review and comment internally within the Mojaloop community. Now, part of that obviously will be review and comment by the special interest groups and by the CCB, but also we will be wanting to talk to implementers of the system and potential implementers and indeed interest parties in general to make sure that they are happy with the market practice document that we've come up with, and in particular that it addresses all of their existing needs for the system. So that, I think, is all I have to say about that. The other main risk, obviously, and the thing that means that we can't be as confident as we would otherwise like to be about this, is that the ability to complete a lot of these tasks relies on timetables over which we don't have very much control. That is the internal timetables of the ISO organization. Now, we're new members there. We don't really have a clear, or at least I don't have a very clear sense of how these things go. So we will need and may need to adjust these timetables depending on how quickly we can get decisions. Any questions? I have one. Only one? Well, disappointed. I should have been more provocative.
This is really good to see. And I think I really appreciated your readout on what ISO wants from us, because that makes it much easier for us to, essentially us to be the long pole here and not them. So if they're saying, give us the market practice document and then give us the message set, and then we can make something work, at least we have a working structure for this thing. Do you believe the market practice document is mostly how we want to use those messages and therefore largely in our camp to figure out? Or is it that it is sufficiently broad that we're expecting other users outside of the Mojaloop practice to also put input to that document and to expect to gain something from it to be able to use it in their own environment? So would we see, for example, a Visa or a MasterCard say that draft market practice document needs to incorporate our thinking because we intend to use this also?
Well, the quick answer to that is the first of those. The market practice document is entirely within our control. We don't need to submit it for approval to the ISO standards organization. We don't need even to submit it for review. It just says how we intend to use it, to use the message set, that is. It's the message set which is to be approved by the ISO standards organization. Having said that, we are presenting the message set, and indeed have been asked to present the message set, as a way of doing something which is not the Mojaloop way of doing things, but a standard way of doing what we have characterized as a highly automated, straight-through processing way of transferring funds between organizations of very different types. So this is something which, although we are undoubtedly the world leaders, we're not the only people interested in that, and it might behove us as part of this process, I think, to start talking to other potential players in that space and see to what extent they would be interested in contributing to a market practice document. Because in a lot of ways, the definition of a market practice document says this is how a system like this ought to work.
That makes sense. So you'd end up with enough collaboration with market that you essentially set your tent stakes wide enough that we can fit inside of that, and others can either use it or not with no consequence to us, but that it is generic enough that you're not required to use Mojaloop in order to, these messages that you're defining and the way you put them together in this market practice document doesn't necessarily require the use of Mojaloop. Other people could implement those in their own systems.
Indeed. Absolutely.
Okay, that's great. And also, so yeah, I'm sorry.
So I was just going to add to that, that I think what will eventually happen is that the market practice document will be rather like the template for scheme rules. Now, it may very well be that individual implementers of Mojaloop schemes will want to take a market practice document, which essentially says to, I mean, let's say an institution that wants to join SEPA, these are the things you must do in order to be a member of SEPA. And our market practice document will say, in general, these are the things that you need to do in order to be a member of a Mojaloop scheme. Now, as I say, I can imagine a situation where an implementer will say, yes, that's all very well. We do not want to do things in quite this way, so we will specialize the market practice document for our scheme. Now, there are, of course, as I hear from your skeptical potential downsides to that. But there are also potential upsides to it as well, because what we'll be saying to people is this is not a Procrustean bed on which you stretch your particular frame.
Or the worst option, which is yours is too large and you must make it fit anyway.
Well, yes. Well, that's part of the point of a Procrustean bed, is that if it's too large, you just get appendages chopped off.
Right. No, this is great. I think then it sounds like you have a pretty strong work plan, and that the only thing we can't count on is the timing for hitting each of those steps that require ISO involvement, because that's really out of our control. About all we can do is work at the natural pace of our organization, and we get to the point we do. Is there a risk, though, that other people are working on the same thing or something like it that outpaces us? Or are we pretty much the only ones?
I don't know, and I suspect we won't know the answer to that until we submit the revised business justification document, because certainly one of the things that people have said to us already as part of their initial review is, oh, isn't this rather like what they're doing over here? And you know, in a number of cases, they were things that I hadn't heard of, and indeed Jason hadn't heard of either. But we went and looked at them, and we were confident that actually we were doing something rather different. However, I expect that once they have a clearer idea of exactly what it is we're trying to do, they will come back and say, actually, there are some other people working on this. Perhaps you should be looking at looking at what they're doing, or working with them, or trying to evolve a joint approach. And it is possible that we will wind up with a set of messages that other people could use in different ways. And that's the point of the market practice document. It enables us to say, we pick these messages up. In order to do things in a modular loop way, you have to use them in this way.
Yes. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much for that clarification.
It's my pleasure. Does anyone else have any questions? Okay, in that case, I will hand you back to the safe hands of Kim.
Thank you. Okay, thanks for that. And then Sam, I believe you're up next.
Thank you, Kim. Can I, okay. Can I, okay, do you want me to start with the objectives? Can I start sharing screen? Or,
Yeah, I'm going to stop share. I'll share. Go ahead.
Thank you. All right, so we had a pretty good conversation thanks to Philip, Eric, and Innocent who joined apart from the team. Of course, Luis was there, and Georgi, and others joined as well. Thank you, Alyssa and Kim, for your support as well. So on the objectives front, as we presented, so we were able to confirm, the team there was able to confirm the objectives, the candidate objectives we had at the beginning. One is to make sure that the implemented PISP or 3 PPI services are up to production quality so that they can be adopted. And then we want to have that like defined using 2 specific measurable criteria. So the first one was that we'll have end-to-end, at a minimum, we'll have the end-to-end testing of the third-party features with support for FSP and PISP instances. Third-party services on the hub, and along with these, we'll have the Google standard payments adapter developed as well, which can serve as adapter for even generic third-party services. But there is a more ambitious goal we want to set as well. There are some caveats to that and constraints as well. But if there is one implementer who has deployed the third-party features, whether that's a third-party implementer or a DFSP, at least in their testing or QA environment, then I think we want to define that this has been successful, this effort and work stream. Coming to breakdown of these objectives break down into 4 main things and 1 group of bonus goals as well. First one being bringing the third-party services to production quality. So we discussed that. We divided that into 2 parts here. One having addressing the existing gaps and adding more integration in end-to-end tests, running them, making sure that the pass rate is. And then ISC support there. The second one being documentation usage guides, which I've added towards the later sprints. And then the third item we had was the GSP, the Google Standard Payments Adapter. The design is actually underway now. After the mid-PI meeting, we want to have that implemented as well. And then, of course, the payment manager support for both DFSP sites, which will include or encompass the scheme adapter, and has many more layers or components on top of that. And then supporting PISPs as well, building on the third-party adapter we already have. So that translated into the objectives we had. There are some risks, as I mentioned, and thanks to inputs from some of the community members as well, emphasizing the need for more and clear documentation which will enable building on and extending the existing use cases as well. So there is a huge dependency, which you can see in this board we marked there as well on Payment Manager. It's currently in the adoption process with various boards, including the DA, the Design Authority, and the Change Control Board. The PSP workstream here needs at least a signal that we can continue with development, using that in our in the dev team, even if the adoption process is not complete. So that is our request to the DA and the CCB there, and maybe TGB and the foundation in general. And of course, there is a dependency on community contributions we are counting on, especially in the open source components such as a Payment Manager and other core services and infrastructure as code components as well. And there is a slight risk that there might be changes needed to the third-party API as well. So if these are unforeseen at the moment, we have a good version that's published, but if there are changes needed, then that increases the scope. We want to call that out as well. And of course, there are some things we don't control, as things like an adopter deploying them and testing these out. But hopefully, with the advocates we have at the foundation and both the Moduloop and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, we can help. We can get help from external entities who will take these and deploy in their test or acceptance testing environments. We were able to take a poll in the group that was there, and ended up with the confidence level between 3 and 4. So rounded that up to 3.5. I'll stop sharing, and if there are any questions, we'll take that. Louis, or any other attendees that we do have anything to add?
Nothing from my end. I think you captured it pretty well. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Louis, for your support. If there are no questions, over to you, Kim.
Great. Okay. And then Paul, do you want to?
Before you step in, sorry,
Oh, sure.
Sam.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, from the TGB perspective, it would be helpful at some point if you folks could give us kind of the summary roadmap arc that you're following, so that we have a visibility, and that the board has a visibility on sort of the readiness, right? Like, when is this ready for the community to utilize? And is there a plan coming from those who are working on it to implement it? I assume there's interest in Rwanda. There may be interest in other places, and it would be great if we understood from members where the application would be coming for this. But I mean, it's great to see that it's fit together so well. And I really have no questions about the program, other than when you guys might be ready to give a readout on the sort of go-to-market aspects of it.
Thanks for that comment, Miller. We definitely draft a note to the TGB. It actually, coincidentally, one of the questions that came up from, I think, Eric or Philip who were on that meeting was the same thing, and Innocent was the same thing, like when this will be ready for adoption and will be production quality. So yeah, our goal is that after this PI, it will be production quality, but we'll put that in writing and request the TGB for support and help as well in aspects such as Payment Manager, but also some community contributions. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks. So Paul, do you want to share your screen, or should I share mine to discuss both?
Sorry, yeah, I'll just share my screen.
Perfect, thank you.
Here we go. So just talking about bulk payments. We're not as advanced as many of the other schemes who already have been spending a lot of time on this and are well progressed. So we're going to focus, I think, for the first 3 sprints on essentially getting our act together on this, and using the mid-PI check-in meeting as a kind of decision point, rallying point for people to work together, and then go into the second half of the PI with hopefully beginning in some form of implementation. The first part of the work is going to focus on our initial solution with VitsaWorks. We are going to be focusing on, as we said, our breaking down of a bulk payment request into individual transactions. There's already been some good input on that from the community, and I'd like to thank Labina and Matsaliso for their inputs on this. So we're going to focus in the first sprint or so on really sorting out our endpoints within Payment Manager and finishing off the process flows and the initial user stories for that, the phase one implementation, if you like. And we want to present that to implementation partners at the end of the first sprint. Ambitious, I know. And part of that is going to be looking at the bulk get parties endpoint, which I know is in the revised version of the FSP IOP spec. We'll be looking at that after this. Then we're going to be looking at the end game, where we want to end up. And I think I've already recruited a few people to our product council subcommittee based on our discussions today, which is good progress as far as I'm concerned. And they will be helping to work together with me and others on the process flows and the endpoints there. We've already begun to share documentation on that and start to work together. So for me, this session today has been extremely positive. We do have a reliance on Payment Manager deployments, which we can't avoid because Payment Manager is what we're going to be using to orchestrate this. We've also got a placeholder in for the third sprint where we're looking at 3 PPI. We need to make sure that we've got it all in place for bulk, because it's going to be an important use case for fintechs offering bulk disbursement services on behalf of government departments or corporates or whoever it may be. And then we need to also be looking, probably after, might bring that forward actually, review everything in the light of developments around VNext, because we need to be making sure that we're fitting in with that so that we don't get any surprises hitting us in the back of the neck soon after implementation begins. And in the light of how early we are in the lifetime of the development of bulk, or next phase bulk, I mean, building on the bulk implementation that we already have, that's as far as we've got so far. And it's difficult to be more specific than that until we've done this first set of thinking about it. So that's it really. Open to any questions.
Yes, it's going to be counting for us, extra credits, extra marks for us, because we recognize.
I'm assuming that wasn't anything to do with bulk payments.
No, it wasn't.
Okay.
I think somebody went.
Yeah. Okay, back to you, Kim. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, and then let's go back to the architecture team. Pedro, are you guys ready to share your screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
All right, give me just a second. All right, can you see it? And
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, so we did work in this format, but we didn't put everything like this. I'm going to start with this review. So the big objectives for the alpha release, and I went through them the other day, Tuesday, during our presentation. We've broken them up in more tangible ways during the discussion that we had in the breakout. And so what we have is, we have the release of the cross-cutting concerns, the initial version of the cross-cutting concerns. And mind you, always understand this as alpha release, alpha quality. So it's not even beta. This is very foundational. So it's not something that we can use for anything else other than having developers building on top of it. So We will be releasing during PI 17 the cross-cutting concerns. Some of it is work in progress. After that, we will go into two parts. One is the initial versions of the business or the key business bounded contexts, and those will include interoperability, so that's the API, participants, transfers, accounts and balances, and notifications. And we chose these ones because those are the ones that are essential for the happy path of a transfer use scenario or use case scenario. And after that, we will do all of the others. The others will likely go to PI 18. The reason for that is that we don't have a lot of resources, and we didn't start at the beginning of a PI, and the work that we have cut out to do does not fall nicely in the PIs. So that's why we did this exercise of making sure that we can deliver something meaningful by the end of PI 17. And that's why we're not delivering the alpha versions of all of the other bounded contexts. Those will have to be done later. We would like to also have, and again, this is an intention, we would like to have a working prototype that can be used to run a hackathon by the end of PI 17. So there's a lot of doubt in there, not necessarily on the technical side of things, but on the resources again, and in the possibility of running a hackathon on top of it. So no doubt we will have something by the end of PI 17 that we can use as a working prototype. We don't know if we can do a hackathon on top of it because of resource constraints. And then lastly, we will obviously have a delivery plan for the next PI, which will, if everything goes well, include the remaining bounded context that we were left from PI 17. So quickly summing up, out of scope, the same. Anything that is production ready, anything that is easy to use from the implementer's perspective, or that can be deployable and visible outside developer community. That's out of scope. That's not the point of this alpha release. This is foundational work. Release issues and risks. The risk is always the same in here. We are, and that goes into the low confidence vote that we have. And yet there's a bit of an explanation that is required here. If we split the confidence vote in two parts, in the technical ability to deliver what we have, that's a very high confidence vote. We know what we have to do. We know exactly how to do it. It's just a matter of time and resources. If we then evaluate our confidence in delivering on time with the resources that we have, that's fairly low. And this is something that is important to say and put out in the open to the community. We really need help. We really need developers to allocate time for this. And it's not just at this stage, at least, it's not, we don't need bits of help. We need some commitment, some 2-3 days a week commitment to do it this phase. Our promise is that once we go past this alpha version, it's going to be much easier to open to the community in so that other contribution models can be used, where people can commit smaller things, and which we expect is going to be much easier for people that have other things to do but wish to commit to this and contribute to this. So essentially the big risk here is that we don't have enough resources. We started mid-November building this. Obviously there was holidays, so this was a special PI, but then halfway through the PI, key elements of our development team were pulled away to do other stuff, surely important stuff. But the point is, there was a point where our team that was already very small was even smaller for a while. So we hope that next few weeks we can come back in full force, the full force that we have possible, and go back to this. So going back to this vision of it, this is we're doing this Kanban style because there's a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of discovery that we have to do on the technical side of things for the cross-cutting bounded context. So the way we laid out this was we're going to continue doing the cross-cutting concerns, which we started at mid-November last PI. We expect halfway through the PI to have the cross-cutting concerns all done, alpha quality, alpha level. After that, we will be focusing on those business bounded contexts. So interop, participant lifecycle transfer, accounts and balances. And this is what we intend to release. So to recap the objectives, alpha release of the cross-cutting concerns done by the end of PI 17, and a part, probably the most important part, but a part of the alpha release for the business bounded context. This is happy path only. I have to repeat this. This is an important aspect. And the intention is that after PI 17, we can open so other developers can help. Risks, resources, that's it. That's the only risk that we have. Or that at least that's the biggest risk that we see. And it's such a big risk that it essentially avoids all of the other risks. Confidence vote, I mentioned that and why this is a low confidence vote. It takes courage to be open about this. I know, but this is the way it is. So that's our presentation from the reference architecture. One comment that I'd like to add. The reference architecture work that we've been doing is now phasing into the vNext build. So my suggestion is that we change this work stream into vNext build and start having the reference architecture discussions as an ongoing theme, because we really need to nurture the reference architecture as we go on. All of these work streams surely have information that is valuable to be contributed back to the reference architecture, so we can keep on enhancing it and updating it. And then as we update the reference architecture, we also have to look at the vNext build that we're doing and see if there's any changes that need to be incorporated in the vNext. So we would like to suggest that this work stream is renamed to vNext build. So that's it from our side.
Great. Thank you so much. Any other questions for Pedro or any of the work streams?
I have one that I just want to connect the dots between what Paul Baker was reporting out on for the business operations framework. They obviously have to make progress from where they are, and they chose a particular working strategy to get there. And he made the point that there's a connection between what they're doing and the vNext architecture, reference architecture work that's been ongoing. If mid-PI you start really to shift your focus from having completed largely the cross-cutting work and now to be focusing on the vNext build, it would seem to me, to your point of getting contribution from the other work streams, isn't there a cross collaboration there that allows a focus on how does vNext take over? I'll just put it in that one context. How does the vNext business operations framework look different but complete enough to take over from what we have now? And what would be required for that to be true in the architecture work stream? And of course, what is it that the business operations framework work stream essentially can't get now because of how the architecture is currently structured for the existing release, so that we're focused on closing gaps in capability that are coming from the actual use of the system. And I realize that, you know, and I've said it before, to quote Yogi Berra, in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice, but in practice there is. We have to kind of transition away from the architecture theory and into the architecture practice. This is where it starts to get messy. And of course, we need some structure and some care as we make that transition. It might be useful to look at that, which work streams could be collaborating on this transition.
Yeah, for me, that is also the essential aspect of it. This is something that will take some time, and we need to onboard and make sure that everyone is contributing, and not just contributing, looking at the structure that we're putting in place, which was discussed. It's all in the reference architecture. So and as the other work streams mentioned, and this is already a big success for the reference architecture work, which is people are looking at the reference architecture as kind of a guide of what we want to have in the future. So from that perspective, this is already a big benefit. To your point, as soon as we have the cross-cutting concerns ready in alpha mode, in alpha quality release, we would like people from the other work streams, if they can, to start looking at it and start poking it and then testing it and then playing with it. Because definitely that is the most important aspect and benefit of the work that we're doing. And the way we phased this vNext build with this alpha being targeted to developers is exactly so that other work streams can look at this and say, we're going to start incorporating ideas, or we're going to start designing the new things that we are building in accordance to the structures that we have in the interfaces and the message structures, etc. So we really hope that that can happen. And if at that time we find convergence and we find that other developers from other work streams can contribute to the stuff that we're doing, that's going to be even better.
Does that give you more than the level of confidence that's being reported out now? Were you to achieve that, some degree of that anyway, by mid-PI?
I want to work with what I have. You're putting me in a difficult spot.
Sorry, that was an unfair question.
Let's say that statistically, we're more inclined to reduce the confidence vote, but we will be really happy if that happens.
Yeah, fair enough.
And it's going to really, it's not just that we go faster. We've discussed this before, right? This initiative,
That's right.
It must go. It really must go as fast as we can. That's a further benefit, an additional benefit. So if people can help, great. If not, we can continue. We go.
Thank you.
Thanks, Miller. Any other questions? Any other doubts? Anyone wanting to help with development? I know I keep asking this question.
If you guys don't know how to plug in, please reach out to Simeon, myself, anybody, any of the workstream owners, and they will get you plugged in. Does someone have a question?
I see Ross has a hand up. Ross, can you unmute?
Well, actually, it's not a question so much as this is in response to Pedro's request for help. So maybe we can take this offline and chat between the two of us. I have project management skills galore, and I've also, turns out that I'm a competent R programmer. So let me know what you need, and I can help with those things.
Great. Yes, please reach out in Slack so that we can have a conversation.
Great.
Anyone else offering resources and their goodwill? No? Okay.
Super. Over to you, Simeon.